So, good morning and welcome to everyone. I'm David Gilmore, Director at DG Legal. Welcome. We've done around 100 free webinars since we started this project a couple of years ago, and we very much appreciate the kind feedback and the positive Google reviews we've received, which motivates us to do even more of them. At DG Legal, we'll receive a variety of different requests for help from law firms, and the one area which is probably the most uncomfortable is where a law firm is a victim of a data disaster. So we thought that this might be a popular topic, and judging by the very high number of bookings, today we weren't wrong. Let me start by answering the most common question we receive. Yes, you will receive slides from this event, and we aim to get them to you tomorrow. I'd now like to introduce today's presenters. Now, I'm not going to read all the bios, you can see them in front of you. I'll just say a few words about each person. First of all, I'd like to say I'm really impressed with a firm called Legal. They provide a platform for payment, onboarding and compliance. Please have a look at what they do at legal.com, that's legl.com. All of their staff are outstanding, and Kate is particularly impressive in the field of risk and compliance. Moving on to Louise. Louise Gibson is a crazy Leicester City fan who I met for the first time in Rome a month ago. Sadly, Leicester lost and our European journey was over. Anyway, at the airport, the plane left the runway 20 minutes late, and we thought that we'd missed our interconnecting flight in Zurich. It was just bad luck that the next plane was at the other end of the airport. The 20 or so Leicester fans were quite a sight, sprinting through the airport, hoping to get the plane before it took off. I got off to a good start being near the front of the plane, but I didn't know that Zurich is the largest airport in Switzerland. And so the slimmer and considerably fitter Louise Gibson soon overtook me, and I was the last person on the plane. Anyway, let's skip my bio because it's really boring. So we'll move over to Nick Hanning. I often refer to Nick as the nicest man in the legal profession. He's hugely bright, has a very varied skill set, and despite his abilities, is very humble. He's also a judge for first-tier and employment tribunals, and I think his only weakness is being a fan of Norwich City Football Club. Now on to Matt Howgate. Matt Howgate is DG Legal's resident equivalent of David Williams. He keeps us constantly entertained with his dry humour and wit. He is an extremely bright lawyer and has been an absolute godsend to us over the past decade or so. Adam Makepeace. In my opinion, Adam has done wonders for Duncan Lewis and Tucker Solicitors in his role as practice manager. He was a very deserved winner of an LAPG award and has been a friend to us over many years. In common with our other speakers, Adam is an incredibly bright individual. Okay, let's have a look at the agenda for today. So, as you will have already guessed, I'm doing the introduction, and I shall comment on the true cost of cyber attacks to law firms. I will then hand over to Louise, who will talk about current cyber threats and how to protect yourself. Adam will then explain what happened at Tucker's when they were attacked, and then Kate will talk about what firms can do to prevent data breaches and protect their clients. Those speakers, plus Nick and Matt, will then join our panel discussion to take your questions. Please feel free to pop your questions in at any time, and we'll address them in the Q&A session. Just a word about the case study before we start. Tuckers are one of thousands of law firms that have been attacked, and we seek to learn lessons from their experience. I think every firm has experienced some kind of IT error, whether it be sending an email to a wrong address or a huge cyber attack. Even some of the world's biggest firms, such as Freshfields, have suffered massive attacks. It really is a case of, but for the grace of God, go I. So, on to a short session from me. Now, according to a recent government report, 39% of businesses identified a cyber attack in the year 2021 to 22. Now that seems on the face of it to be a very high number, but it's interesting to compare that figure with the percentage of firms that have been attacked in the legal sector. So I should say that I recall in 2017, a Law Society article said that 65% of law firms had been the victim of a cyber incident. Now, according to a very recent SRA report, 75% it is now, 75% of firms visited by the SRA for a thematic review had been attacked. And in that report, the SRA said the other 25% had been targeted. So I think you can assume that you would be very fortunate indeed if you are not targeted at some point for some kind of cyber attack. So why are law firms targeted then? Well, I think there's a variety of reasons. Of course, the one that probably comes up the most commonly is the fact that lawyers do deal with high value transactional work. And I guess the best example of that would be conveyancing. There's been so many conveyancing frauds, attacks, etc., that I think most lawyers are very wary of things going wrong with high value transactions. There is a perception, true or not, that many law firms are not particularly savvy in the area of technology. Of course, the data that lawyers handle is very sensitive. You think about different areas of law, such as crime, children, etc. This is very, very sensitive. And of course, if an attacker gets access to that information, it's quite easy for lawyers to be exposed to attempted blackmail. And I guess more recently, of course, thinking particularly about Russia, lawyers may be the targets if they are representing unpopular clients of firms in controversial territories. Just a few words about the different methods that cyber criminals use. Email modification, well, that's very common, isn't it? Where you appear to get an email from one person, but it's actually somebody completely different, and criminals are getting much more sophisticated, and it's getting harder to spot when you are receiving an email supposedly from one party and it's actually a criminal. Of course, spyware and ransomware has become much more common over the last 5 years, as has different types of viruses. And we are constantly under pressure to keep our phones, tablets, and computers up to date with the most recent version of antivirus software. Otherwise, we are vulnerable to attacks. Denial of service attacks, where servers are targeted, has again become much more common in recent years. And of course, gaining remote access to a firm's system so that they can manipulate computers. Just a few words about the cost of cyber attacks, because we think of costs necessarily, or meaning usually some kind of direct financial loss. You know, for instance, that could be a fine or a penalty from a regulator, such as the ICO. But there are other costs as well. There are indirect financial losses and costs. For instance, reputational loss. If the public hear that a firm has been attacked, they may not have an understanding of just how difficult it is to protect yourself. So reputational loss may lead to a decrease in client instructions. Of course, data loss is extraordinarily difficult to cope with, and trying to retrieve data can be a challenge in every circumstance. And of course, stress for the staff involved in a cyber attack, particularly for the managers that are responsible for putting the situation back to normal, can be really difficult to cope with. So we think prevention, just like everything else, prevention is better than cure, if at all possible. So we think firms should really think very hard about what they can do to protect themselves. And at that note, I shall move on to Detective Sergeant Louise Gibson. I'm just going to stop sharing and Louise can take over.
Great, thank you very much, David. Appreciate that. Hopefully I'll be sharing my screen. You can see everyone on it. Let's move you all out of the way. And hopefully that's okay. So good afternoon. Is it afternoon? Oh, it's good morning. Good morning, everyone. Hello, my name is Lou Gibson. As you've been made aware, I'm a Detective Sergeant for the East Midlands Special Operation Unit, and I'm in charge of regionally coordinating our cyber advice for individuals and businesses across East Midlands. And I'm also in charge of our regional prevention, cyber prevention network to mentoring young hackers and diverting them into some positive pathways. And the reason I've mentioned that is because no matter where you are sitting and listening to this webinar, there'll be a version of me. So I do encourage you to get in touch with your local regional crime unit and see what services they can offer you. And I'll be going through services that we offer across East Midlands as well. So I'm just going to be running through some cyber awareness information and generally what are the current threats to businesses. So the biggest one we've got is phishing emails. Phishing is where the email appears genuine, but it's actually fake. It might be to try and trick you into revealing sensitive information, or it may contain a link to a malicious website or an attachment that is infected with malware. So some phishings are random, others might be targeted to you as individuals or employees of the law sector. So it's just being a bit mindful. They're way more sophisticated than they used to be. It used to be pretty obvious with spelling mistakes. Now they are very targeted. So again, what I'd encourage you to do, and I'll be saying this throughout my presentation, is just to look at your own social media footprint. You Google yourself, how much data are you leaking about yourself online, because they can use that information to make those phishing emails look way more realistic and targeted to you. The second one is ransomware. I'm sure you're going to be speaking about ransomware a bit later on with Adam's presentation, but ransomware is where cyber attack gains access to an organization's systems or website. And what they can do is install malware that will encrypt your data, making it unreadable. And they'll offer a ransom to unlock your data or have it permanently lost, or sometimes they threaten to release it. So businesses may be targeted directly, but inadvertently affected by an aim where it's been a mass indiscriminate campaign seeking to exploit as many victims as possible. A lot of people think it's targeted. It's not. Generally speaking, they'll find a vulnerability within a system and do a mass kind of campaign. So, phishing, everyone accepts a phishing email is like a mass canvas email, and ransomware can be exactly the same. So those are the two big areas that we're going to be sort of talking about. So phishing, like I said, phishing is a type of social engineering where attackers influence the user to disclose information or click on a bad link. So phishing is commonly carried out by email, but we also have text, which is called smishing, and we've got phone calls, which is vishing. I love how they do it. It means nothing to no one outside the InfoSec world, but it's basically people lying and trying to get you to give out information. So the NCSC, so every advice that we give is in accordance with the National Cyber Security Centre. So our advice is, the obvious, don't click on links. But what I want to say to that sits around user training, because it's not about blaming people for clicking on link. It's about educating individuals and staff members within your organization to be able to identify suspicious emails and respond accordingly. And it's not just about training everyone at sort of management level in your organization. Anyone that has access to your network needs training around cybersecurity, because it could be anyone that inadvertently clicks on the link. Now, within my team, and I'll be plugging some of the stuff that we do within our team all the way through, we can do some phishing exercises within an organization, and we did one a year or so back with a school. We sent out a fake phishing email to see if it was clicked on within a school. Within seconds, someone had clicked on it, because it was a free holiday in half term, so they were all clicking like mad for it. So it's about training people and making sure that they don't fall foul to what is effectively a relatively simplistic type of scam. So what are the telltale signs of phishing? So how is it addressed? Is the email addressed to you by name, or does it refer to you as a valued customer or friend or colleague? So just again, making those little details around who's it actually addressed to. Often there's a threat to act urgently. So we've all probably as users had an email around, your TV license scam, or, at the end of the financial year, HMIC scam. So there's always a threat to act urgently. Our logos, graphics, quality, or as expected. Again, just doing a little bit. I don't expect everyone to be a detective. It took me ages to get that qualification, but let's have a look if it's a bit obvious. Is it as expected? But don't also trust, oh, there's a logo on it, it must be right. It's very easy to Photoshop things nowadays. So again, it's just looking at it holistically. Does it sound legitimate, or is it trying to mimic someone? Again, think about the language, spelling errors. Often it's quite obvious. Now they're getting more and more advanced. So again, just having a little bit more detail in it. Addressed by a bank or authority. Yep. So your bank will never ask you to click in their email for anything. So they'll be sort of directing you to go on via the portal and log in. Again, it's a basic cybersecurity awareness. And always, if it sounds to be good to be true, it always is, isn't it? Let's be honest. So those are sort of telltale signs that I'd expect you to share with your colleagues, and it's good for your own sort of cyber hygiene as well. But again, it's a basic around awareness of training. So quick overview of ransomware. So ransom attacks are increasing globally, and it's the #1 focus of the National Cybersecurity Centre. 47% of UK businesses have been affected by ransomware attacks. It's a major problem, and it is a malware that prevents you accessing your computer and data stored on it. So we're seeing a huge amounts of increase in ransomware. And it's a major priority within the police and indeed the National Cyber Security Centre and the National Crime Agency. So it's something that, it's ever more increasing that everyone's going to be, fall victim to it or have attempts to fall victim to it. So how do they get in is what you want to know, some usable advice. So phishing emails is probably the #1 way they get in, hence why it's really important for that user training for all people that have access to any network. So I can't reiterate that enough. Remote desktop protocol. So it's really timely now that we're unfortunately moving away from home working, despite me loving it. So we're being asked to go back in the office despite the petrol prices. And it might be timely to look at your remote desktop protocol. So does that port need to be open? That port for sort of computer people out there is 3389, and it's a common port that is used to access network. And if it's left open and insecure, it's a really easy way to get onto your network. So what I'd encourage you to do is have a look at your remote desktop protocol. Have a consideration around your agile working, or whatever you call it, working from home. Do you need that port open, or is there now not a need for it because we're moving away from that type or style of working? Again, also think about having a conversation with your IT people around what ports are open, because ports can be quite insecure. So there's other ports that kind of spring to mind that are quite insecure. So you've got Telnet, which is port 23 off the top of my head, another one that should be closed. So it's a conversation about making sure those ports are closed. Access bought in a criminal marketplace. So again, you just need to be mindful that there's loads and loads of personal information being bought on the dark web for peanuts in terms of financial gain. On a personal level, probably doesn't affect you in your organization, but there's a website called Have I Been Pwned, which is a really good website to see if your personal email address has ever been breached and appeared on a criminal marketplace. So again, have a look at our website, which is at the bottom. That's a website created by my staff, www.eastmidlandscybersecure.co.uk. It will give you details about all the stuff I've mentioned today. Another one is zero-day exploits. This is a really big one. Zero-day exploit is a vulnerability that's not previously known has been exploited, and often that's done with a lack of patching. And what I mean by that is there's a vulnerability on an operating system or a server, and it hasn't been patched, and the patching is released, and it's up to the IT company or the IT guy in an organization to update that server to patch that vulnerability. Your patching sort of schedule is really, really important. So I'd always encourage people to look at all of their operating systems and their servers. Are they up to date? Have they been patched? Because zero-day exploits are a big thing to get into a network. And I will sort of liken it to everyday users. We all get updates from Apple or Windows to say our OS needs updating, and often we leave it a couple of days because it takes ages to upload. Often an upgrade or a update is required because they've identified a vulnerability, a security vulnerability. So I can't emphasize enough how important that is. So if you are affected, we do advise you not to pay the ransom, as there's no guarantee that you'll get access to your data or computer, and it's likely that your computer will remain infected. Another common misconception is that as soon as you're compromised, you'll get infected. Often they'll sit idly on your network for a period of time, and then at the most opportunistic time, they'll download the payload to encrypt your data. So think about your business continuity plan as well. Make sure you disconnect the affected devices from your network, change any passwords mentioned, and check other accounts to see if they've been compromised. Before you restore from your backup, verify it's free from any malware. So again, think about your backup. So ransomware is only as valuable as your backup. So how out of date is your backup? So if you've got a backup that was done the day before, you can use that, and it mitigates the value of the ransomware because you've got a backup. And like I said, ensure your backup is free. So is it offsite? Is it offline? Make sure you have an offline, offsite backup. If you have fallen victim to ransomware, check out this No More Ransomware, because they talk about it's a website with initiative by the National High Tech Crime European Europol Centre, and it's basically their goal is to help victims of ransomware retrieve their encryption data without having to pay the criminals. So always go onto there and have a look. And before I whistle stop tour of cybersecurity, these are the stuff that we offer in our policing world. It's free. Everything we do is free, as one would expect. So we offer victim support and engaging with those on the cusp of criminality. I've talked about that. So we mentor young hackers, but more importantly for you guys, we do cybersecurity reviews of people's networks. So I've got trained cyber CompTIA Security Plus base level qualification of staff that will go in to have a look at your cybersecurity posture to see how secure you are and give your IT guys some recommendations. And we sort of support cybersecurity standards like Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. We also do tabletop exercising, which is around business continuity, cyber resilience, and that's around sort of like the management level to see how well prepared you are for a cyber attack. We talk about staff awareness training, as I've mentioned. We do that for individuals of the community and business employees. We do a drop-in webinar every month across East Midlands. So if you can only send a few members of staff, have a look at our website for the next available webinar, and feel free to just drop in for an hour cybersecurity presentation, and we do general advice and guidance and events. And one last thing I'll mention is that we have a really fun new immersive exercise we do with organizations and staff members, and it's a cyber escape room. So we'll come into your organization and we will run a little cyber escape room to see how much cyber hygiene individuals have around their cybersecurity. And that's me. Any questions, put them in the chat or have a chat with me at the panel, and I hope that was okay. I will stop my screen sharing if that's okay with you. And I'll hand over to Adam.
Thank you very much. Has everyone got my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Can you see it? Excellent.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, why am I here? So I'm here to, oh, there's a hand up, David. Do you want to deal with that first?
Just bear with me a moment. I think what we will do is we'll come back to people at the end of the session. Adam, so you carry on.
Okay. So yeah, really, I'm here to sort of share an experience. I mean, Louise has just gone through a number of issues in terms of how people are attacked, and David referenced the cost of these attacks and stress being very high on the list of these costs, and he talked about the non-financial costs. Well, they are financial costs and the amount of time dealing with these attacks, and so just really want to share a personal experience. To put this into context, we're dealing, the incident at Tuckers took place on the 24th of August, 2020. I left Tuckers in around sort of April 2021. But then on the 10th of March, the ICO published their decision. So what I'm dealing with is stuff that's in the public domain, but you're more likely to have come across it in the Law Society Gazette. So, you know, on the same day that the ICO published their decision, the Gazette reported that Tuckers had been subjected to a £98,000 fine. So yeah, how did this go down? So basically, it was like 5 months through the first lockdown, and I was in a shepherd's hut in a bit of Hampshire near Farnham, bit of R&R. I was away with these guys. And, you know, as is my wont, it's about 5:30 in the morning. I'm not much of a sleeper. And so I picked up my phone and got this kind of message. You know, morning, Adam. I think we've been victim of a cyber attack. And that's from Chirag. He's was one of our software developers out in India. So we hadn't worked him too hard. He'd come into work at 9 o'clock in the morning Indian time, and he'd come across this problem. I'm like, you know, well, yeah, what makes you say that, Chirag? What's going on? And it's like, well, the emails aren't working, and I've just connected remotely to a machine that he had in Warren Street in London, and there was a message on it saying, "You've been cyber attacked. Give us all your money." So I don't actually have the message anymore. I'm not sure that's exactly what it said, but you get the gist. You get the gist. And so, yeah, I mean, you're just sitting there. A lot of my thoughts, I don't suppose I can put in. I can say out loud here. I think I'll just channel my inner Edmund Blackadder and summarize my feelings as bugger. So then what do you do next? Well, firstly, there are things that aren't in your business continuity plan that you have to sort of grapple with first off. When I was just reviewing these slides a bit earlier, I just realized one of the things that wasn't in the business continuity plan was take your laptop on holiday, but I had. But there are things you don't know. So I could barely get a data signal in where I was in Hampshire. So I was trying to find Wi-Fi at not 5:30 in the morning. I allowed myself an hour or two to get myself together. But then trying to find either a Starbucks or a pub with Wi-Fi. And I was driving around Hampshire trying to park the car. There's no Ringo. So I'm going into a shop asking if they'll give me change for the parking meter so I can get parked, to go into Starbucks, to get Wi-Fi. And, you know, this is all a highly, highly stressful experience before you can even start to organize the response. Then what you got to do, first thing, you got to do your ICO reporting. Yes, you've got 72 hours to do that, but I was straight onto that. I was straight onto the SRA and straight onto the National Crime Agency to, you know, report what was a crime. We've been victims of a crime. And then obviously you address what the impact is on the business and how we're going to get moving, bearing in mind the particular effects of a particular attack. And then you've got these criminals to deal with. You know, you're getting these emails from people saying, you know, give us all your money if you want us to release your files. So just give you an idea of how we were set up, because I very much liken this to the situation where we had the front door firmly secured, but we had probably left open a second floor window around the back of the house, and you know, that's where they got in effectively. So we have our case management system, which had all our live files, all our accounts in a cloud-based system, fully protected by multi-factor authentication, you know, and a secure environment. And we had an old legacy structure, you know, servers that we hosted on site that we were moving away from into this sort of more secure environment. But this was the area where we were vulnerable, and this was the area that was victim to the attack. So in some ways, you know, we got lucky in the sense that all our live environment wasn't attacked. the main problem from the business point of view was the lack of email in the short term, but we had to deal with that. So in the ICO report, they refer to the fact that we don't know how the attack took place, but as was referenced by Louise, with regards patching, what we do know is that there was a vulnerability in one of these platforms that we were using, and the patch wasn't applied in the relevant period. And by the time it was applied, some malware had been installed on the systems, and it probably just slept there, to be honest, because if you look at the timeline, the attack was in August, but the malware had probably been on the system for some time. And when I say for some time, these guys were, an organized criminal gang, and as Louise said, orchestrating a mass campaign to exploit a vulnerability. And I don't think they were targeting us. In fact, I know they weren't targeting us. They were targeting the vulnerability. And so when you look at the people they attacked, there is nothing that links them together. Yeah, they weren't all law firms, they weren't all in the criminal sector, they weren't all in a particular geographical region. Yeah, they were far and wide. But they obviously, this vulnerability obviously affected a very large number of companies, because it took Maze, a couple of months to work through their list in order to execute the attack on Tuckers. And so once that malware was inside the network, we were totally vulnerable. Yeah, it was just sleeping there, and they could choose when to execute the file. And what they did was they encrypted a very large number of files. So the ICO report identifies 972,000 individual documents effectively. It says in the report that 24,000 related to court bundles. I'm not quite sure why they've gone down that rabbit hole. That's not quite correct, but it's kind of irrelevant. What we do know is that of this very large number of files, a very, very small number were actually taken out of the system. The rest were just encrypted and left where they were. And the ICO report says they were published on the dark web. Again, that's not quite accurate, or rather the process is you are asked to pay the money within a certain period of time. If you do not pay the money, and we didn't pay the money, that's when they decide to publish. From the business point of view, because our live environment hadn't been affected, the encryption of these files wasn't really that much of a problem in terms of the ongoing business. What really hurt us in the very short term was they'd also managed to sort of lock us out of our email accounts. They didn't steal any emails, but they just prevented us from accessing them. So from a business continuity point of view, that was the key issue. So we had to get a new Microsoft Exchange server, which we set up in the cloud as we'd always intended to do. And within a couple of days, we were back up and running. But that's not the end of the story. That was just 2 days of getting ourselves back up and running. But the fallout, just in the chronology that I outlined at the beginning, we've gone from August 2020 through to a decision published on the 10th of March 2022. So you've got over an 18-month process dealing with the fallout. Initially, the SRA were happy with the report we'd made. I'm not sure whether they may now take a different view in light of the ICO report. The ICO, though, wanted a lot of information and, were monitoring us constantly as we were dealing with the fallout. And, one of the things that we had to deal with was the notification to the parties whose data was affected. So I said there were 60 clients that the documents related to. And we managed to contact all but 7 of those under the obligations that we had. 7, if you appreciate, we were doing criminal defence work, so I can't remember particularly, but if you think that we'd have had clients in custody and then they'd been released from prison, you know, we didn't know where they were. So we made efforts to contact everyone, and we managed to contact 53 of those. And as I'll come back to, you know, it was the right thing to do to try and contact these people. It was, you know, it was our obligation, and it was referenced in the ICO report that it was the right thing to do. But, you know, I have to say, I find it quite ironic in a way that, but for the fact that we had the obligation to go around and tell them, I don't think anyone would ever have known. Yeah, I genuinely believe that no one has ever accessed this data. Because you've got to understand actually how difficult it is to do. You've got to know, first of all, it had been stolen, and it was people only knew because we had to tell them. You'd have to go to the Tor browser, you know, download the Tor browser to navigate the dark web. And then on the Maze site, there was documents from literally hundreds of companies and public bodies. I mean, the Highways Authority of India always tickled my fancy for some reason, but, you know, just this diverse group of organizations. And even if you then found the information relating to Tuckers, you'd have to be bothered to go into that. And there wasn't any financial data, any passwords or anything like that. So there wasn't anything that was of value other than its ransom value, in my opinion. So we told everyone as we were supposed to, but for that, I don't think anyone would ever have known. One of the consequences of notifying people is that they then consider whether or not they've got a claim against you. And, you know, one thing I wasn't aware of, but now am, is like the personal injury sector, there are lots of data breach lawyers, in inverted commas, who basically kind of farm these claims. And I think much like the ransomware hackers, they try and scare people into paying out money, because you'll get these very long letters, you know, 5-6 page letters, predominantly boilerplate, and then the 10% that they've amended, you know, in some cases were just laughably bad. However, you still have to spend a lot of time responding properly to these letters to, you know, make sure you put your best foot forward. And I believe we did that. And to my knowledge, there haven't been any successful claims against Tuckers relating to the breach. So what else did we do? Well, we contacted Louise's equivalent in the Met Police, Cyber Griffin, because there wasn't a lot for us to do, because we'd already got our live network on a secure cloud environment, which had the relevant security. We had, you know, been training people routinely on cybersecurity. We weren't blasé about this stuff. But we did put everyone on the Cyber Griffin course, and, you know, retrained, because I think, you know, the underlying sort of message is you can't do enough. You can't do enough. So some further reflections in light of the ICO report. You know, clearly we were not perfect. Clearly that second floor window around the back of the house was open. You know, there was a vulnerability that someone came through. But I do think there was, you know, I do think Tuckers was very harshly treated in many ways. The Commissioner makes clear that accepts the primary culpability for this incident rests with the attacker. You know, we were the victim of a crime. But then I think we need to understand and probably reframe the standards that we're actually being judged by, because I think reflecting on this, I don't truly think I had internalized the extent to which these standards were going to be applied to us. So, you know, the ICO considered the state of the art, the cost of implementation, the nature, scope, context and purposes. Yeah, they've got this kind of framework in their mind. And don't forget, this is all conceptual because I don't think anyone saw the data. So, you know, as lawyers, when I read this decision, it refers to industry standards of good practice, ISO 27000. I would be amazed if anyone on this webinar has ISO 27000. The National Institutes of Standards and Technology, still no, not a clue what you're on about. We do, however, know what the SRA is. We did have Lexel, and I'll come back to Cyber Essentials because I think this is a really important issue. So one of the issues flagged up in the report is this issue about multi-factor authentication. And I think, you know, the way this is phrased is slightly unfair. As I've said, we did have a live environment. It was properly protected. We did take security seriously. We did have MFA engaged, but the vulnerability was on an area of our old system where we didn't have the same level of security. And so our weakness was effectively the time it was taking from move to one environment to another environment. Obviously, if I had my time in again, I would have spent the time that we used responding to the attack and the money spent responding to the attack to have accelerated that process. But, you know, in a busy business, we were migrating this information, but, you know, we clearly, in hindsight, didn't do it fast enough. So this is just a reference to the patching, because the ICO does reference the delay to apply the patches. So patch immediately was a message from Louise, and that's a lesson we learned the hard way. I would just say though, how as a manager in a business, how as an owner of a business, do you know this is happening or not happening? If you're in a cloud environment, whilst it might be more expensive, at least you've got the security of knowing that is being done for you. If you're hosting your own servers, then, you know, as a manager, do you know that your IT guy has or hasn't patched a particular server or not? So, you know, either as managers of the business, you've got to be much more proactive about understanding what's going on in your IT department, or frankly, my strong advice would be to seriously consider the cloud environment and just taking that off the list of your headaches. So there's another reference here. The Commissioner understands that our policies identify clients' data as its most sensitive data. You know, and again, talking about the standards we're being held to and why we're being held to these standards. And as David referenced that at the outset, you know, we do hold sensitive data, and, you know, we are being held accountable to high standards because of the nature of the data we hold. So just going to do a little bit on Cyber Essentials. Cyber Essentials is something that we did look at, and we went through an initial assessment process. We didn't pass on a couple of items, and again, we had it on our list. Okay, we need to do that. We need to do that to get ourselves sorted out. But what I would say in the context of Cyber Essentials is, even if you do not have Cyber Essentials, you are currently being held accountable to the standard of Cyber Essentials, and that you should have Cyber Essentials. Yeah, if you have Lexel, Lexel says you should be accredited against Cyber Essentials. It's not a must, it's a should in the standard, but, you know, that's been referenced in the ICO's report. And the government has said from the 1st of October, government requires all suppliers bidding for contracts involving the handling of sensitive data to be certified against Cyber Essentials. Now, I do not know why this isn't a term of the legal aid contract, because it seems to me manifestly clear that that's a government contract involving the handling of sensitive data. It's not currently a term of that contract, but we are being held accountable to that standard. And purely the fact that we were a regulated entity seems to have been another stick with which the ICO sought to beat Tucker's. So, notwithstanding the fact that the ICO acknowledged that we were subject to a criminal attack and that the primary culprit for the data breach was the criminal attackers, the Maze Group, and the fact it was very complimentary in the report, to the extent it was able, to consider the following mitigating factors. I'm not going to go through all 13, but there was a long list of things that, frankly, we got right. Although admittedly, most of the factors listed deal with the response to the attack rather than the events that led up to it. But, you know, we have got a situation where we were a victim of crime. We've behaved in an appropriate way, according to the ICO, and yet the result is a fine of £98,000. And in case you weren't aware, that's a lot of money. So that's, God, it was stressful just going through that again. Yeah, I mean, it was quite an experience, very humbling experience, because, like I say, it is something that we took seriously. You know, it wasn't something we were blasé about. However, yeah, there was a vulnerability. There clearly was a vulnerability, and that was exploited at considerable cost to the business. That's me done, David.
Thank you, Adam. I think it's me next, but it's absolutely terrifying to hear it. I know when in the practice section you went through it, and I was terrified then, and listening to you now I'm terrified again. And this is for myself, and I'll just pull my my slides up now. Hopefully you can see these. If I can slideshow these. Yes, so for myself, this is something that I, as a solicitor, and I'm experienced in risk management, I lecture and talk to clients on these issues all the time, on data security and what can go wrong. But there's nothing like hearing directly from yourself, Adam, from Louise, with the real impact that these issues are having on the individuals behind the, so it's very, it really hits home. So for me, thank you so much for sharing, both Louise and Adam. So I'm head of risk and compliance at Legal. I have over 20 years experience in the legal sector, both as a practitioner, as a team manager, and then now advising law firms and red tech providers in relation to risk and compliance. So I support Legal's a client lifecycle management platform, helping firms with the due diligence on their clients, but also in relation to payments, and making that a more secure process. And I think that's really relevant for today, how to make that data much more secure, that sensitive data. So what I will be addressing today is in overview. I will be taking a brief look at the SRA cyber report that was published on the 1st of June this year, some common personal data breaches, and some key areas of data security, and also how to establish a culture of privacy in your law firm. So the SRA Risk Outlook report that was published just earlier this month looked at some of the key IT security threats that the SRA have been made aware of, and we've heard in detail from Adam and Louise about those. Now, interestingly, what the SRA have reported, that the phishing and email modifications make up to half of all the cybercrime reported to them, and that's something that I'm really seeing in practice quite regularly. It are those phishing emails, and often it's actually not the firm's IT or the firm's security that has been compromised. often it's actually on the client side, their security around their emails being infiltrated, and actually the client being socially engineered there. So I'll talk later on about training, but it's obvious to think about training staff, but also there's a requirement to train the clients as well as to what to expect. So the sorts of things we'll see on the footer of firms' email addresses is about cyber securities, and that's one way you can teach clients, but also in your client care letter, in your company documentation, and when you're speaking to clients, to make them really aware. So I think it's really important to look at, yes, train the staff, but also train and educate your clients. The SRA noted that the conveyancing is still the main target, but this is widening to other areas of work. They also highlighted voice impersonation systems that are being used largely in other industries, but that will inevitably creep into to the legal sector more and more. Is they're so sophisticated, the scams now, and I've personally seen this, and thankfully they've been near misses, where the actual attempt to divert funds from the client to the criminal. They use the emails have been cloned, so look exactly like the firm's email. They've received telephone calls pretending to be the fee earner, stating their name, saying that the accounts team will be telephoning this afternoon to take payment, and it's down to the client to recognize that there's something not right there, and the firm at that point, when the client's been targeted like that, have very little control. Even when the phone calls come through on the phone, the number that flashes up is the firm's number. So you really have to be on your toes as a client and as a law firm to spot these very, very sophisticated scams. And ransomware was also highlighted in the SRA's report, which we've have heard covered today already. So Adam mentioned the data protection and general data protection regulations, and I think it's really important at this point just to understand the difference between any old data and personal data, which if the data is classed as personal data, there's a higher standard that we're held to, and that's in the UK GDPR, which is tailored by the Data Protection Act 2018, and that's the standard we're held to in relation to personal data. So when Adam was speaking about cyber essentials, and that's the standard that we're being held to, it's around that personal data. We've got a higher obligation. It's not any old data. So what is personal data? It includes information relating to natural persons. So that's a living person as opposed to a corporate person, or a deceased person as well, so that it's a living person, can be identified, or who is identifiable directly from the information in question, or can be indirectly identified in combination with other information. So the definition is actually very, very wide, and it even goes as far as an IP address or a credit card number. If you can identify that individual from that information, that is personal data. So it's so wide. And then what is a personal data breach? So it's a breach of security leading to the accidental or unlawful destruction, loss, alteration, unauthorized disclosure of, or access to personal data transmitted, stored, or otherwise processed. So something's gone wrong with that personal data, and we've heard so many examples already today in this session. Oops, I think I missed a slide, or a few slides. So some of the common breaches that I see in practice with law firms, often the most common breach that I see is emails inadvertently going to the wrong recipient, and this is human error. Now, often those incidents, they can be recovered quite quickly depending on who it's gone to. If it's gone to another law firm or an estate agent by mistake, and they confirm that they'll delete that data, you can be fairly confident that there's low risks there to there's low risk there to your client or the data subject, because it's not just your client who is subject, it's anyone, any natural person who is involved. Where it can get more difficult with those breaches is, say, for example, it's gone to in a acrimonious family matter, for example, if that email's gone to a respondent in a case to the other side, that can really blow the whole situation up. So human error, we see fairly often. Accidental authorizing of multi-factor authentication. So Fiona's away from the desk, or could be at the pub. The phone flashes up with the access, and they automatically, almost by muscle memory, click accept to get rid of that message. They may have let someone in. So these sorts of issues relate to human error. You could have a breach relating to more natural disasters. So accidental destruction of the physical documents, could be a flood or fire. But in one of those events, that could open up a vulnerability to that data. And then, of course, malicious intent, and that's around the cyber attack, the unauthorized access that we've heard in a lot of detail from Adam and from Louise. So one of the data protection principles, of which there are 7, is around integrity and confidentiality, sometimes called the security principle. And that can be broken down into 3 areas. So confidentiality, how are you protecting the firm? How are you protecting that data around unauthorized access? And that could be data, that could be accessing the data online on your systems, but it could also be leaving the office unlocked over the weekend, for example. Integrity, how are you protecting that data in terms of modification or corruption or tampering? And again, that could be malicious. So there could be a malicious intent to do that, or it could be that too many people in the organization have access to that data and could accidentally modify that data. And then availability, how can you protect against the unplanned loss or destruction of that data? So it could be, for example, original deeds in the office. You have a fire, those deeds are gone. Or it could be you've got some evidence stored online that's compromised and lost, and that could be critical to a case. So those are the 3 areas that really are around security you need to be looking at. Which takes me on to, how do you protect that data? There's security controls that you can put in place to prevent or to firm up your position. I think it's a really good starting point. And we'll start with procedural, to actually understand, yes, your obligations under the General Data Protection Regulations and the Codes of Conduct with the SRA, but to understand what data are you actually holding and where is that data? So producing a data map to break down into categories, what data are you holding, where is it being held, and how is each category being protected? And I think that's really, I would say, the starting point to understand what you've even got before you can put in those processes to then keep it safe. So in terms of procedural, looking at what policies and procedures you've got, that data mapping exercise, data breach procedure, and that recovery plan. And as Adam explained, so in such colour, is it workable? Is that data recovery plan workable, or has it been prepared because it's a requirement of Lexcel and then put in a drawer somewhere? Is it accessible if in the event of a data breach, and is that actually practical? So if something goes wrong, can you recover? So the procedural side of it, then the technical side of it, as has already been covered, how important it is to have that technical framework in place. So firewalls, network perimeter defenses, so secure environments that you can work within, strong passwords, antivirus solutions. And then looking at personnel, who have you got within your organisation? How well are they trained? Have you screened them? And depending on what their role is, you may want to apply a different, a more intense level of screening. So for example, your chief cashier and your head of conveyancing, you'd want to know, you'd want to know more about their background and ramp up that screening for those sorts of individuals. And then looking at the physical side. So what's the security around your physical documents? Have you got lockable cabinets? Have you got intruder alarms? Especially with working from home situations, how secure is that data being held when people are holding it at home? Are they securely shredding that data? Have they got lockable cabinets? You know, have you actually risk assessed how your staff are working at home? I think that's a real area of vulnerability for firms. Yep, and so as I think David mentioned earlier, prevention is better than a cure, and having that framework in place. So as I've mentioned, plan your data protection strategy, then implement that strategy, which means that the staff should understand it and it is actively implemented and used. So we need to be training around that, training around those policies and procedures. Then review the effectiveness of those policies on a regular basis, and monitor and review. And then it's an ongoing cycle to then review what needs changing, plan, and then implement, and then the cycle continues. So in terms of responding to a data breach, it's really important that you're able to detect the breach in the first place. And I think that could be technically detecting it in terms of systems, but it also could be, say, if a fee earner has sent an email somewhere by mistake and they're too afraid to speak up, or they're not even aware that that's a real problem, you may have a weakness in your detection. So have a look around your processes there. And then once the breach has happened, firstly, absolutely, you need to mitigate that loss. So what can you do around that? And it really depends on the nature of the breach as to how you mitigate that. It may be as simple as getting in touch with the incorrect recipient to try and manage that side of it, or it may be more serious in the terms of in the situation with a major cyber attack. Who's your first port of call? Who's that SOS phone call going to be to? Do you have cyber cover? And if you do, does that have a first response process? And is that in your disaster recovery plan? And then reporting, which Adam's mentioned, there's a requirement for reporting to the ICO if it reaches a certain threshold. So you've got, if it reaches that threshold, you've got 72 hours to report. But the threshold is, is there a real risk to the rights and freedoms of the data subject? Now, depending on that, and you'll need to go through a risk assessment process to work that out. But if the answer is yes, then you've got 72 hours from the awareness of the breach to report that. There's also reporting obligations, as Adam's mentioned, to the individual. Now, interestingly, the threshold for reporting to the individual is lower than the threshold for reporting to the ICO. So it may be that you're required to report to the ICO, but not to the client, but do work with the ICO on making your decision in that situation. Now, the rationale behind it is that sometimes letting the client know may cause more distress than not reporting it, but that is a very careful line that you need to walk. And then, of course, following on from the reports and the mitigation and the containment, you then review what's gone wrong, what do we need to put right. Now, if you have had to report to the ICO, you will have had to set out what you're doing in response to them. So that will be part of the process. But even if you don't have to report to the ICO, you should have a review process to say lessons learned, what do we need to change in our process. And then finally, and I'm aware that time's running out for me, establishing a culture of privacy in your firm. And I think this is so important because often the weakest link is, it can be the individuals within the firm. So really, that's the area. Often, you know, you can have the best data security in town, but are there vulnerabilities? And it could be with your client, could be with your staff that leave the back door open. So from my perspective, it's really important that it's a top-down approach. So when staff see the leaders in the business behaving in a way that favours a culture of compliance, they're more likely to follow suit. And that's really the importance of culture and setting the right tone. I think it's really important to share learnings from near misses and encourage openness. Particularly that's impactful when one of the leaders has made a misstep or made a mistake, to actually be open about that with staff, to say, this has happened to me. Please do, be aware it could happen to anyone. And then when staff hear that, they're more likely to, if it happens to them, to not feel shamed or not feel afraid about sharing that. Some firms appoint data protection champions at all levels of the business to kind of be the champion for data, the data culture and the data practices within the business. And that's a really valuable thing to do. Training is the obvious one, training for staff. But I think training should be holistic. So yes, an annual routine regime, absolutely. But in addition to that, how else are you dealing with training in regular one-to-ones, in team meetings, and just the conversations that you have with staff that can reinforce that training on a regular basis? And then consider your data security frameworks. As Adam mentioned, the ISO 27001, most firms haven't heard of, but if you want that tip-top that framework, then do look at that. But if you just want to take baby steps in that area, definitely take a look at the Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. The main difference between the two is the Cyber Essentials is more of a self-assessment process, where the Cyber Essentials Plus, you'll be independently stress tested on your systems. So that one's a little bit more expensive, but it is also a little bit more probing. And then NIST, as Adam mentioned, and I suspect that many firms won't have heard of that framework either. But if you are really interested in looking at the different options there, I encourage you to look at all of the different frameworks available. And then finally, and these will be available for you when the slides are shared, these links, they are hyperlinks to the SRA's Outlook report that I mentioned that was published 1st of June, and also some further guidance from the SRA. Now, the sort of the guidebook, if you like, is from the ICO. Their website is jam-packed full of information with toolkits, and really breaks it down into a user-friendly way to understand what is personal data, what are your requirements. There's a Law Society guidance on data breaches, and also Howden Cyber Insurance has a lot of information on there as well. So if you're wanting the information, there's so much there. There's more than you could really get your head around, really. But if you're looking for that information, the resources are there. So I think that is me. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to joining the panel later.
Okay, thank you very much, Kate, and thank you also to Adam and Louise. Now, I'm conscious that we've been going for an hour and 10 minutes, and we have called this like a mini conference. So I think the thing to do now is perhaps give everyone 5 minutes. So give everyone a chance to get a cup of tea, have a toilet break, etc. So the time is now 12:41, I think. So we're going to start, or 12:42. We're going to start around about 12:47. So see everyone in just about 5 minutes' time. There we go. Excellent. And great. So I guess one of the confusing things about Zoom is that you've got a Q&A box and you've got a chat box, and I guess people are always uncertain which one to use. I kind of suggested a Q&A, and guess what? Everyone's used the chat box apart from one person. So that's just ironic, isn't it? But I'm going to reward the person that used the Q&A first and use that one as the first question. And I think this one is one for Lou, because the question came up halfway through her presentation. And the question is, you have said, do not reveal personal information on the phone. And yet large institutions phone you and ask for precisely such information on the grounds that they want to make sure that you are you. Why do you not advise them to use such tactics?
Give personal information out on the phone. Did I actually say that? As in
Not, you said not to.
Not to give personal information out. Well, it depends about who's calling you. Perhaps verify the caller. So what I would suggest as well, I understand what they're saying is, if you've got an organisation that is calling you and that they confirm your details, if that's a cold call, what I would suggest is you hang up and you call them back to confirm their identity. What I want people to do is to get in the behaviour change of making sure that they know who they're talking to. There is an assumption that if you get called and they ask you to verify your details, that there's an assumption that that person is in fact who they say they are. What advice we give is, if it's an unexpected call, confirm by hanging up, getting a number, confirm who they are before you give that information out. What we're trying to avoid is people getting cold called unexpectedly and going, because we are used to giving personal details out as a way of verifying ourselves, but we are trying to verify before we do that who we are talking to, and don't assume that we're talking to who they say we are, especially, and I think the key thing is it unexpected? Does that provide a little bit of clarity, David?
Absolutely, and I think what I'd like to add to that is a real life situation that has happened to many firms, including our client, and millions of pounds were involved, where somebody suggested that they were from Lloyds Bank, and they actually said to our client, listen, for you to be absolutely sure that we are Lloyds Bank, put the phone down and give us a call back. And the client thought they'd done that, but they'd remained on the line. So you've got to be absolutely sure that that call has been terminated before making the next call. So yeah, you've got to be incredibly careful there.
And can I give you another brief example of a note where so I've had it where a remote access Trojan's been downloaded onto someone's computer, and they had access to the camera, and they were about to verify the bank to say, I'm not sure I'm speaking to the right person. They could see them through the camera and said, oh yeah, I can see you on the switchboard calling us now, but they couldn't. They could just see it through the camera. So you can carry on if you like, or you can just take that as, and they just said, oh, okay, well, if you saw me on the switchboard calling you back, then you must be it. And then they continue to transfer some funds. So what I'm saying is they're really sophisticated now. So I'm just trying to instill that behavior of really confirm who you're speaking to. And whilst I appreciate it is difficult, I think it's when it's a cold call is for me a bit of a flag, basically.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from the panel before we move on to the next question? Okay, we'll move on to the next one that we've got, which is how do you instill a no blame culture into a firm? I'm going to ask Kate to answer that one first, and I will ask Adam for his thoughts as well.
Yep, absolutely. So it's all about what you're doing in practice that forms the culture. So you could have a policy, a written policy and procedure that there's no blame culture, you know, but actually what are staff seeing in practice? Are they seeing people being hauled off, frog marched into the office? What's the sort of the conversation that's being had when something goes wrong? Is there sort of rumours going round and whispers going round about such and such has done this? Or though any of that sort of behaviour, if that comes on management's radar, they need to stamp that out, because what they need to instill is that a real sense of no blame culture, and to actually practice what they preach on that front. So when something goes wrong, to handle that in such a way as to thank that individual for raising it, if they've raised it, reassure them that these things go wrong, reassure them that the firm has professional indemnity insurance for these sorts of things, and that always things will go wrong. And it's about how we react to the problem, which is almost more important than actually the problem itself. And I think that can only happen through actions, not what's written in a policy or procedure.
Okay, thank you very much. Kate, Adam, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd echo that, and one other point as well. But just to sort of extend on Kate's point, I think, you know, we're here talking about cybersecurity and the idea about no blame about cybersecurity. However, a no blame culture means no blame for everything. It's, you know, it's not just we've been hacked, you know, and that's kept a secret. So, you know, if there is a client complaint, if something hasn't gone well in a case, you know, the culture is about every single thing you do in the organization. And the other point I make, and I think this is not well understood, and I think managers of law firms would do well to internalize this and use this as part of spreading that culture. And I'm going to caveat this with, but Tuckers was still fined £98,000. As a rule, I find dealing with regulators, if you tell them stuff, even really bad stuff, they don't seem to care. Whereas if they catch you doing stuff, even really minor stuff, they lose their lunch. So I think, you know, when we're talking about a no blame culture internally, I think we need to understand and communicate to people, because we're kind of victims, aren't we? Oh, the SRA do this, the Law Society, you know, the LAA do that. We're victims. I think we need to change that conversation and tell our people that if we tell our regulators we've done something wrong, that tends to be okay.
Yeah, that echoes our experience, Adam, massively. All of the regulators that we deal with, they've always been very easy to work with, where disclosure has been made of an error or a problem. And as you rightly point out, if somebody else tells the regulator, that they do tend to take a rather different approach. So I completely echo that. Looking at the next question we've got here, I'm going to ask Nick to answer this one, and then Matt. What are some ways that individual members of staff unknowingly open up a firm to risk? So Nick, if you go first, please.
Thanks, David. Unknowingly or knowingly, did you say? I didn't catch
Unknowingly.
Unknowingly. I think that's, you know, as I think Kate was saying, the vast majority of these errors are just basic human error. So quite often a junior member of staff will click on something because they're just not, they're not that well informed. So that, coming full circle, goes back to the training. But it's simple things like putting things in the right envelope, making sure you've got the right attachments, making sure the email address is correct rather than the wrong one. There's a whole host of very simple things. And one of the examples I can give as well is just people working in reception. They'll have files on their desk potentially where names can be seen. And if you've got Joe Bloggs-matrimonial evident on your reception desk, you know, that could be a bit of a huge problem for Mr. Bloggs, who, you know, when local residents are potentially popping in for all sorts of things. So I think there's all sorts of different ways, and the key is around training, and perhaps even more is it's around awareness.
Thank you very much. Matt, your comments.
So forgive me if there's any background noise. I've got some unexpected builders here. I think I completely agree with Nick. There's a lot to do with training. And I think one of the things that we can perhaps do badly is train people on the theory of data security and the theory of data security and the theory of the GDPR and the theory of all of those things, but forget then to draw that down to very specific examples of daft things that people can do without thinking that create significant risk. And so I often find when I do compliance reviews with organizations, I'll say to them, have you ever had a data breach, or have you ever, and they'll say, oh God, no. And then halfway through the questionnaire, I'll say, have you ever sent an email to the wrong recipient, or have you ever opened an attachment that you shouldn't have done? Oh God, yeah, we've done that. and they're not making the link between that activity and the potential for a data breach, because what they learned was this generic explanation of data protection law, and what they didn't learn is here are the 5 things that you really shouldn't do, because those are the things that live. The other thing I'd say is pressure, speed and rushing are all serious problems. You know, people don't, generally speaking, deliberately cock up. They cock up because they're rushing to get a letter out, or they're rushing to get something to council, or they're rushing to respond to an email, and they do something in speed and in haste, which they might not have done had they had a bit more time. I know it's incredibly difficult to manage in the pressurised environment that all law firms work under, but you know, prioritising good over fast is always going to be the way to do it, and that goes back to the culture point that Kate was talking about earlier, and making sure that you've got that sort of appropriate understanding in the organisation.
Thanks for that, Matt. I'd just like to add to that in terms of the point you make about speed being a major problem. We've had lots of clients contact us about a mistake that they've made, that I think we've all made, which is sending an email to the wrong person. And of course, the consequences of that with a law firm can be quite grave. And we did indeed have a client that took great care as a partner of a law firm to make sure that she didn't send the email to the wrong party. She was representing a victim of domestic violence in a court case against the ex-husband. However, at the end of the case, a case that the law firm won, the other side, the ex-husband, challenged the costs, as is his rights, and asked to see various papers. So she sent over various attachments to the ex-husband without checking them carefully. And in one of those attachments was, I think it was a disbursement voucher that had the client's name and address on. And the client had already moved twice, so this is a third move, I guess. So because of that, we designed, and this is completely free of charge, we designed a plugin in Outlook. It's just called Email Checker. And effectively what happens is when you press the send button, it says, are you sure these are the correct recipients? And are you sure that these attachments are the correct attachments? Click to preview. So anybody that wants that free of charge, there's no spyware or ransomware, I promise you, that you're very welcome to have that. Please do contact us. And just to add on to something that Nick was saying about data security. Around about 18 months ago, Nick did a fantastic data security webinar, which included polling. So there's various scenarios that Nick came up with, and people were encouraged to vote with what they thought was the correct answer to each question. Now, we will be rerunning this. We're planning to do that at some point over the next few months. But if you can't wait and you want to have a look at the recording, go to our training page and click on previous webinars and you will find it. Okay, let's have a look at the...
Could I add one more scenario to that?
Please do, Kate.
So we know we've been talking about, you know, the emails and sending emails, and I think it's important to, as I've mentioned when I spoke earlier about the physical side of it, and I think you mentioned, Matt, about posts being attached together. In one particular scenario I saw a few years ago, it was a fraud trial that had been to trial and won. And then instead of sending the instructions to the cost team with the full file, it was sent to the opponent after the trial, but then they had that file and then appealed the trial decision, which is an absolute nightmare. But it just goes to show you the importance of checking your outgoing post as well as your emails.
Thank you very much. I should have said before, Kate, so thank you for butting in. Does anybody else want to make any comments before we get to the next question? No, okay. Right. This one again, I'm going to say Nick and Matt and anybody else can also put comments. The question is, how do you train your staff to be aware of all of the risks? So do you want to start with that one, Matt?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, I've already touched on some of it, which is I think that sort of general esoteric training on the theory of the law is great, and certainly meets the comfort zone for many lawyers, but is not necessarily helpful in this context. The theory of GDPR isn't what people need to know. The theory of data security isn't what people need to know. What they need to know is how not to make mistakes and what things are going to create the biggest risk. So think very carefully about that. Don't assume that an annual training event, and Kate already said this, don't think that an annual training event where somebody like me comes in and spouts wisdom for 45 minutes on the latest stuff that's happened on GP is enough. It isn't. You need to do more. But the other thing is, we're too passive. We don't test understanding. It's not enough to sit a bunch of people in a room and talk at them for an hour. I've sat in lots of rooms being talked at and I've learned nothing from it. And so what you want to do at the end of it is test understanding and have a way of questioning people and seeing whether they've really understood what those key areas are. And also remember that the risk comes from all types of staff in the organisation, not just your lawyer staff. And so I'm often called to train firms, and I'll train all the lawyers, but none of the support staff are in there because they're all outside fielding calls whilst I'm training the lawyers. Well, yay, but they're the ones that are stuffing envelopes or opening the emails, so you've missed a trick there. So that's where I'd start.
Okay, thank you. Nick, do you have any other comments?
I don't think there's a huge amount to add to that, is there? I think that covers all the bases really well. Complete and echo all of it. I think the only other thing possibly is it sort of ties in with this, with an open and no blame culture, is when things do go wrong, share them with the firm. You don't have to identify the person who made the mistake, but flag up what the mistake was, flag up the consequences, flag up how it can be avoided, and make sure people are aware. This is all about awareness, really. I think it's much more, as Matt said, it's not about the law, it's about it's the practical application, and that's sort of awareness on a day-to-day basis. So sharing other people's mistakes without, of course, shaming the person who's made the mistake, and doing so in an open, non-blame way is a really useful way of people understanding how things can how things can go wrong and what the consequences might be.
Okay, thank you. And I'm kind of jumping around in the chat and other media. So tell me if I've asked this question before. I don't think I have. This is for Kate. What are some best practices for identifying security gaps at a firm?
Yep, absolutely. So there should be in your policies and procedures, there should be somewhere in there to test that. So you should have ICT policy, information communications technology, and a security policy. Within there, I would very much recommend that there be something in there to do some kind of check or gap analysis of your security. Now, it's important that the person who does that gap is sufficiently knowledgeable about IT security to do it, because if you don't know what you're looking for, you don't have that expertise, you're not going to spot those gaps. So absolutely make sure that whether it's in-house or outsourced IT, that they have that expertise. But then a layer on top of that is to then independently check that, and it may be you outsource that to a consultant, or you could do Cyber Essentials Plus has the same effect. You're having an external objective test of what you currently have in place to spot those gaps. And I think that really making sure the person that's checking it isn't checking their own homework, and that they have the expertise to check is really important. But having that rolling regular review locked into your routine is really a valuable thing to do.
Thank you, Kate. Any other comments on that? Matt?
What always fascinates me within law firms is how structured our approach to casework is in terms of rules and systems and controls and processes, and how unstructured our approach to management is. And often many of the things that are likely to cause us real risk are within that management bag, and we don't give them the same level of attention. And the other thing is, there is that fascinating thing, which is stuff that you look at changes. Stuff that you look at is reviewed, and so don't forget to look at stuff. I think it just echoes Kate's point that the more you're looking at this stuff, the more it embeds the understanding amongst your colleagues at all levels that they have to keep on top of the things that are relevant to this. So you don't want to become terrible about it, but you do need to shift your gaze away from casework and onto these things from time to time.
Thank you. Adam has got his hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to do Louise's job for her, and just pick up on the point about individuals and training, and then you get into the resources, the costs potentially, and as I mentioned in my presentation, post-hack, but you don't have to wait until you've been the victims of crime to access this. The police really do good stuff. They know the risks, and the quality of the training was excellent. I know that because we put the Cyber Griffin stuff was online, and they did it Tuesday, Friday, on a kind of rotational basis. So it was easy to access in terms of people going to court because they didn't have to do it then; they could do it then instead. And the number of kind of responses I got after those courses with that kind of, oh my god, that was terrifying response, the kind of response that you get when someone's actually learned something. So the resources are out there, they are free, they are high quality. So I would strongly recommend using the police.
Thanks, Adam. I just wanted to I was going to say something. I don't want to sell myself. It's always better when someone sells your product for you. So that's really, really kind of you. But yeah, like I've said, my presentation is very brief, but we do a comprehensive package of training that is absolutely free. All of my staff are trained to a CompTIA Security Plus bare minimum standard. And what's a really good point with that Matt mentioned, we have acknowledged also that we're moving away from passive training to more active training. 5 years ago, cybersecurity is a relatively new concept, so we were explaining what ransomware was, we're explaining what phishing is. Now what we're doing is trying to do a more immersive training to try and get people to do that long-term behavior change. It starts with their own personal hygiene, because if someone's got some really good cyber hygiene at home, then they're going to bring that to work as well. So we've got some online immersive training that we can do. We've also got some in-house, like I said, we've got some really fun cyber escape rooms that we could do to organizations. And it really is impactful, because we're trying to get people to have it in their forefront of their mind. So feel free to reach out to us, like I said, my email, or have a look at our website, which is at www.eastmidlandscybersecure.co.uk, and we do monthly drop-in webinars if you so wish as well. And that's my sales pitch over. Thanks.
Thank you, Lou. A few years ago, when team bonding type exercises were more in fashion than they are now, we actually did an escape room, and that was in Loughborough, and it actually went down really well. We all had a wonderful time. So I'm going to talk to my colleagues about this cyber escape room things, because it sounds really fascinating, and it's something that we might toy with. So
great.
Yeah, that's really, really, really interesting. Now I'm going to have a look at the chat and just pick up any comments which are of particular interest. Teresa said, thank you, Adam, for explaining so well the reality behind the headlines. I also find it concerning that the requirement for Cyber Essentials certification is not in the LAA's contracts. Well, a couple of things. I mean, I had a good look at that point that Adam raised about supplying legal services to the government, and it seems that what they require is only accreditation for those providing direct legal services to government, as opposed to legal aid contracts. But I think we all agree it's a no-brainer. And it's really important for firms to learn the difference between Cyber Essentials at the basic level and the advanced level. The main difference being that the basic level, of course, is self-assessment. And Kate mentioned that you shouldn't mark your own homework. So if you're really serious about this, given that law firms are in a very sensitive area, you should give serious consideration to the advanced level, where somebody does come in and test and make sure that you've understood and implemented the requirements properly. Okay, let's scroll down. We've had another comment saying, Adam's experience is filling me with utter terror. There is no way we could meet a £98,000 fine. And that firm is reapplying for Cyber Essentials accreditation, which is great. She's asked a question though to Adam here. She's saying, I simply don't have the knowledge to complete the questionnaire. We've completed the questionnaire. Yeah, I know, it's a tough questionnaire. It's a very long questionnaire, even at the basic level. Were Tuckers using internal or external IT providers with Cyber Essentials?
A mixture. So we had our own internal IT team. There's at least one person on this call that was involved in our initial pass at Cyber Essentials. So yeah, a mixture. I agree. You know, I consider myself reasonably technically proficient, but it would certainly be beyond me to complete that questionnaire. So, and this comes back to the cost, doesn't it? And why things get pushed down the line, because it's another cost. But yeah, I mean, from my point of view, a cost worth paying. But you know, I appreciate people are juggling many other costs. But if you need to get someone in to help you, then yeah, I can't recommend that highly enough now.
Yeah, and I think what was fascinating about your case study, Adam, is that people know this in the crime legal world, that Tuckers has a reputation for being IT savvy. In fact, it's developed its own case management systems. It's developed other IT products, and that's what makes it so fascinating. This is a really good firm that was called, and if it could happen to that firm, then it can happen to everybody.
Just to add to that, David, when I was there, we did have a visit from the SRA, who were doing one of their thematic reviews, and they'd gone around X number of firms, and we had to go through a questionnaire with them and told them what we did and how we did it. And you know, we were quite comfortable chatting with them afterwards. And this review wasn't just legal aid firms or crime firms; it included city firms, what have you. And you know, we were quite happy talking to them about the fact that we sat quite comfortably in the top quartile of firms, including all those commercial firms that had all the money to do whatever they wanted. You know, we felt we sat quite comfortably, you know, in the top tier of firms who are looking after their IT. I mean, I know from the criminal defence sector, you know, I find it embarrassing sometimes. You go to court and you find people with unencrypted laptops. You know, we had our laptops encrypted and nailed down for years, you know, wandering around our sector. We felt we were doing this right. And that was what's so scary about getting caught. Yeah,
we've got an interesting message saying, when I saw this, I immediately contacted my IT company, who suggested Duo, so recommendation at £5 per user, and information was very quick. Whenever we log on to our terminal server, we have to use our phone as two-factor authentication. I do remember, I can't think if it was 2 or 3 years ago, I think it was probably 2 years ago, I remember being scared by this huge hack into Microsoft Office, and a very high number of organizations were hacked, including some of our clients, but it was only organizations that were hosting their own data. Those that were on the cloud, and we're on the cloud, you don't have to worry about it. And I think that was a point that some of the speakers made today, that if you are in the cloud, it's someone else's headache. It's not your headache. So I can't recommend highly enough that I've had the idea of storing your data in the cloud. And we certainly do that with Microsoft, not only with our regular files, but also the compliance data for our clients that use Compliance Caddy software solution. All of the kind of data is stored with Microsoft in London in order to meet the Data Protection Act requirements. Okay, someone else has said we use RDS Gateway and Duo to access a cloud-based system. That sounds good. Let's just see if there is anything else. Just scrolling down a long, what for me is a long chat. Okay, there's a good question here from Teresa about, again, for Cyber Essentials certification, and this would be, I guess, for the advanced level. Should you use your own IT company or someone completely separate? If you use your own IT provider, there might also be the problem of marking their own homework. That's a really good question. I'm going to ask a couple of people to answer that. Let's start with Kate, please.
Yes, a good, very good question. It's something that should be considered. In fact, I've been through that dilemma with a firm recently discussing that very thing. And it really comes down to, well, to a number of things, but majorly budget. So if you're going to get someone else to do that for you, it's probably going to cost you a couple of £1,000, I would suggest. So one budget could be a blocker to do that. But definitely, if you have the budget to do that, then the more removed from your firm, the better, really. Also, in terms more generally about using outsourced IT, again, it comes down to budget. But if something goes wrong and you've outsourced that IT security, you've potentially also got their indemnity insurance to fall back on if the problem is that it is with them as well. So that's something to consider as well. But like with most things, it comes down to budget.
Yeah, someone has just made a point there, saying, but not 98k. The point being that I think most law firms can afford to spend £2,000, but not necessarily £100,000, of course.
Can I just jump in on that, David?
Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
Yeah, no worries. So, I mean, just to deal with that £98,000 figure, to make it slightly less scary, hopefully, is my understanding is the ICOs start on the basis of looking at a percentage of turnover. You know, the maximum fine they can levy is 4% of turnover. So Tucker's is obviously a bigger business than some. So the level of the fine does have a relationship with the size of the business. So, you know, that figure shouldn't be taken as, you know, applying to smaller businesses who would be proportionally fined less. It would still hurt like hell, but, you know, just be aware that that 98,000 figure needs to be taken into the context of the size of the business.
That's an excellent point. Thank you very much. Our colleague, stroke managing partner of a law firm, Sarah Charlton, says we use Pure Cyber for this reason. It used to be called Wolfbury. That's about the Cyber Essentials using an external company. There's been a number of thank yous, which I'm not going to read out. Does anybody have any other comments? We are on the cusp of finishing 10 minutes early, which is great. I'm sure nobody will be bothered about that. But any final comments from anyone on the panel? No. Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you very much. I very much enjoyed introducing today's speakers and being the chair of the panel Q&A. I would just like to remind you that you will get a copy of the slides. We'll aim to get those out tomorrow. And we would very much appreciate, particularly if you've not done it before, giving us a Google review. You will get a link to a Google review. And one thing that we're piloting at the moment is we have no plans to charge for our webinars, certainly not 99% of them anyway, but we are piloting a charitable donation scheme. So we'll give you, if you want to donate a small amount of money, please feel free to do so. The charities we've chosen are Ukraine, Afghanistan, and also a local children's charity. So consider donating that, but it's not at all expected. So thank you very much. A huge thank you to our speakers and our panelists, and we look forward to the next webinar. Have a good day, everyone. Bye for now.